Welcome this beautiful fall morning to the King Institute for Faith and Culture. I'm glad you're here. It's a special day today with a special guest, one of King College's own alums, and we are very delighted to have him here today, and I hope you will give him much respect and a warm welcome. It was on this day in 1933 that Albert Einstein officially moved to the United States to teach at Princeton University. He'd been in California working as a visiting professor when Hitler took over as Chancellor of Germany. Einstein's apartment in Berlin and his summer cottage in the country were raided, his papers confiscated, and his bank accounts closed. He returned to Europe and handed in his German passport, renouncing his citizenship. He considered offers from all over the world, but Einstein eventually decided on Princeton, which offered him an attractive package teaching at his Institute for Advanced Study. But he had hesitations about the place. For one thing, it had a clandestine quota system in place that only allowed a small percentage of the incoming class to be Jewish. The Institute's director was worried that Einstein would be too directly involved in the Jewish refugee crisis. And so he micromanaged Einstein's public appearances, keeping him out of the public eye when possible. The director even declined an invitation for Einstein to go see President Roosevelt at the White House without telling the scientist. When Einstein found out, he was rather upset and personally called Eleanor Roosevelt, you can do that if you're Einstein, and arranged for a visit anyway. In 1938, the incoming freshman at Princeton ranked Albert Einstein as the second greatest living person. Do you want to guess who came first? Adolf Hitler. I guess that ought to give us pause about all sorts of ranking systems. I am pleased to bring up Denise Asbury, King's own Director of Development, to introduce today's speaker. Thank you.
It's a real treat today to have one of King's own alumni back to share with us his experiences in life and learning and in Christ. His has certainly been, by all accounts, from what I can tell in our brief visits this morning, a godly adventure. And his leadership that he has learned in his 25 years in Virginia government leadership positions is something, his wisdom, his insights are something that we can all certainly learn from, and are excited to hear what he has to impart with us this morning. I was really struck by his LinkedIn page as I did a little stalking on him to find that his current title, he's retired, but he's listed himself as Chief of Ubiquity, retired and pursuing personal interests, something I strive for myself one of these days. His last position was Deputy Secretary Administration in the office of Governor Bob McDonnell. Prior to that, he was the Deputy Assistant Secretary in the U.S. Department of Labor. And prior to that, he served as a member of the Parole Board for the Commonwealth of Virginia and in several other leadership positions throughout his lifelong career. He and his wife, Kay, had a godly inspiration, I guess mostly his wife, Kay, to establish an institute in 2005 called the Gloucester Institute, where the two of them together continue to serve youth in building mentoring and leadership guidelines and examples and classes. It's a place where you can go to learn. It's a place where you can go to heal and to discuss and have conversations. It's a place that's very close to their heart. They restored the building that the Institute is located in. It was a part of his wife's childhood, and it's something that's very special, not only to their heart, but into the hearts of the people that they're serving through the Gloucester Institute. And again, we're just very excited as we celebrate 150 years of King's faith, learning, and life. It's always such a treat to have one of our own come back and impart what they learned here at King, the values, the lifelong lessons that will stay with you throughout your life. We have a number of Mr. James's classmates here today. We welcome you all as well. And if we had time, we'd go into stories later about the Dining Hall Boys, which I'm learning is a very exciting group of individuals who used to live above the dining hall, which was in the Fab years ago. But maybe if you have a chance to speak to Mr. James afterwards, you can ask him about some of the stories about the Dining Hall Boys. Without further ado, will you please help me make welcome Mr. Charles James Sr.
Good morning. You see, I'm placing my watch here. That's so I can ignore it later. That's an old preacher joke. I'm not a preacher, but I'm the son of a preacher who was the son of a preacher who was the son of a preacher. Can you hear me in the back and in the balcony? I want to be sure. I guess they can't hear me. Can you hear me in the balcony? Great. All right. The heads didn't move, so I figured they could hear me. You know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I used to be up there too. Adolf Hitler, most admired person. I was sitting there thinking, I'm sure Princeton founded on godly principles, they would have said Jesus Christ. But they didn't. They said Hitler. I find that's probably not very different from what you would find today on most secular campuses. Something of that sort. But here at King, I would hope, we wouldn't have that kind of sentiment. It would be allowed, but it would be a matter of concern. You see, King is a different kind of place. King is a new place. And I will unpack that for you. When the Holston Presbytery decided to create what we know as now King University, they did so recognizing a need for education, particularly Christian education, in order to help the people of this region deal with the aftermath of the Civil War. It was a devastating thing. And 100 years later, what they did became a part of the new history of America. 100 years later, in 1967, 100 years from 1867, black students showed up on this campus. That actually is quite remarkable. And here I am, 50 years later, coming back to tell you what it meant and what it means for the future. As a student, I had no idea, none at all. In fact, I was not even a follower of Jesus Christ. I grew up in church, but you know, if you're born in a garage, it does not make you a car. And so I came here without Jesus, left here without him, and found him because I had met him here. And it grew on me. It grew on me because in my senior year of high school, in the dark of night, a man in an overcoat and a fedora hat knocked on my parents' front door. He wasn't a Fuller brush salesman. Most of you don't even know what that is. Or even a vacuum cleaner salesman, and you don't know what that is either. But in those days, those things were sold door to door. He asked to come in. He was looking for me, so my parents came into our small living room. He sat and explained that he was the president of King College, and I didn't know where or what that was. and he wanted me to come to school here. Who gets recruited by a college president? Maybe an athlete, but probably not by the president. It was a strange thing. Strange, but it was not weird. Okay? Some things are just weird. This was strange. It's 1967. Segregation, the clutches of segregation were still tight. And so I decided, rather than go off to some Northeast liberal school that was accepting black students because that was all the rage for them at that time, I would take a chance because this man had come to my home. I believe that my life was ordained by God to come here. Not that I knew it, but Sonny Liston knew it, and I came. It was here that I was able to integrate higher learning into my life to see that I could do things that my parents could not do. They couldn't do them because society wouldn't let them do them. My mother was a maid, and she quit because if she didn't quit, my father was probably going to kill her boss because he had hands that wanted to go places. She came home. He picked up another job. He always worked manual labor jobs. That's the only kind of jobs that were available. There were no professional jobs. There were no jobs where black men wore ties. But he decided also to go to school. So he worked at night, 11 to 7. He worked for the railroad. He got on a train with his employee pass, rode from Roanoke to Lynchburg, went to seminary all day, rode the train back and studied, came home and slept and went back to work. Because God had taken him off a bed of paralysis and said, if you will follow me, I will heal you. That was a profound thing in my life. My grandfather had tuberculosis and nearly died, and God spoke to him and said, I will heal you, but you will preach the gospel. You will turn from your ways. His father, a pastor for 30 years, became a pastor after fleeing Florida because his father was hanged and dragged through the streets for failure to step off the wooden sidewalk above the muddy road because two white people walking abreast didn't want to have to go to single file. That's my past. King became a part of my future. My parents had faith. They acted on it. I, not knowing, acted in faith in coming to King. But King propelled me to go back to my hometown and do things that I could not have done had I not come here. Every member of my neighborhood, in those days it would have been a black neighborhood, the lines were drawn very hardly. Every one of them, save one, died in Vietnam. The one who did not die, other than me, went into the Air Force and served in the United States, but the rest of them came home in body bags. My entire cohort of male friends are gone. So that's what I come back to when I leave King College in 1971. I got a job in a warehouse, because that's kind of jobs that, colored people or Negroes, those jobs were made for us. Or we were made for those jobs, perhaps. Whichever way it was, that was the way it was. So I made boxes. College educated, I'm making boxes, as best I can do. My boss decides that I have some ability, and he's going to promote me to the head of accounting for this small company. He unveils his plan, and immediately the people say, "We don't want no niggas counting our money." So he came to me with tears in his eyes and said, "Let's go to lunch." I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I have to fire you," and he told me. But by the grace of God, he fired me on a Thursday, and the next week I was working wearing a tie. It was all in God's plan, because that job led to another job, which led to another job. I ended up in Richmond, the former capital of the Confederacy. And boy, that was a very different place from the little valley town of Roanoke, Virginia. They had another set of rules by which they lived in that little quaint southern town, which I now call home. I live outside of it technically, but it's the Richmond area. It was the capital of the Confederacy. Now they're talking about taking statues down off of Monument Avenue, and they now are erecting monuments to black people. My wife's cousin founded the first black bank in the United States, a woman named Maggie Walker. She now has a statue. It's not as tall as Robert E. Lee and Jeb Stuart, but she has a statue. But you can imagine that the arborist came out and said, "You cannot cut down that tree and put up a statue of a black woman. That tree is a living thing." As much as things change, things remain the same. The challenges are different. The issues are permanent. So I'm here speaking to you, students of King College. I sat where you sat, because this is the world in which you are in now, or the world that you will enter. And you will have a choice to make. Is your life, which is that dash between two dates on a tombstone, is it going to stand for something or stand for nothing? All you have is the dash. You can do nothing about the past. You can only affect the present and have an influence on the future. If you come to King College to get skills and knowledge, I would hope that you would turn that then into understanding. And once you have understanding, you are approaching wisdom. Without understanding, your knowledge is useless. You have to work at getting understanding. You have to get some bumps, some failures, some successes. You have to be betrayed. You have to be supported by strangers and friends. You have to form alliances with people that you may not share everything, but you share enough for a particular purpose to be accomplished. For such is the march of history. Such is the nature of mankind. So I want to offer you a challenge today. But first, I'll introduce it by way of some questions. You know, when somebody at a microphone asks questions, they really don't want you to answer. It's a rhetorical technique. So here's the question. Now, it's going to shock you, so put your seatbelts on nice and tight, and maybe put on a helmet too. Why did God select Isaiah to be a prophet who would proclaim that the Christ was to come and describe the Christ. Why did he pick him? Right, don't answer. But Isaiah said, not me, you can't pick me. I am a man of unclean lips. That didn't matter to God. We're all people of unclean lips, unclean hearts, until we are cleansed by the Spirit. Why did God pick a murderer named Saul? Why did he pick him? Because he had something for him to do. His past was his past, but it informed his future. He was a different man after that Damascus Road experience. Such is the power of God. Here's the most challenging part. That's just a little warm-up. Would God today pick a man of unclean lips to lead this nation? Many people who sit in buildings like this called chapels and churches would say no. And I say that that is coming from a place of piety, a false piety. Now that's the bomb I just dropped on you. I came here to drop a bomb. I didn't start out in my speech preparation to drop a bomb, but at 2 o'clock in the morning 3 nights ago, I couldn't help it. The bomb was in the bomb bay, and I couldn't take off without it. And so I flew here and I dropped the bomb. That is a radical thing to say. But I think it is no more radical than other things that have been said by prophets and by our leaders. You have to think about it for a while, perhaps. We have 2 people. This is not a political speech. This is a speech about Christian life. We have 2 people running for office in this country. One is suspected strongly to be a liar. Another one is suspected to be a misogynist and other things. A man of unclean lips. Pick one. You say, no, I'm not going to pick either one. I'm above all that. I'm going to put forth a protest vote. Well, I went to the library and I looked up protest votes and I found a bunch of books. When I opened it up, there was nothing in them. That's what a protest vote is. That's called I choose not to be responsible. I choose not to risk being wrong. You have to be willing to risk being wrong every time you risk being right. Being right without a risk is no risk. A risk cannot be a risk if it's not a risk, okay? So you take a risk either way. You have to choose your poison, the lesser of 2 evils and all of that. But I say to you, look at the principles that are involved and not the vessels in which the principles are housed. Your school, your state, your home, your nation is on fire. When I was a student here, in the spring of my freshman year, Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. Some students on campus thought that was a great thing. Very few, by the way, expressed it, but those who did thought it was a good thing. I did not know what was going to happen. I do know that back away far from here in urban areas, people frustrated, shocked, scared, burned down their own neighborhoods, which is a quite illogical thing to do. But if you don't have learning and you do not have hope, that is what you do. There are still people without hope It's not just in the urban areas. America's in trouble. It needs leadership. And we, those of us who profess to be followers of Christ, cannot take a protest vote against either one of the candidates. We can't sit it out. We don't have that luxury. This is not a time for luxury. This is a time for necessity. It is a time for leadership. I say this is not a political speech because it's not. I'm not endorsing a candidate. I'm just saying that you always need to look at your choices. Your house is on fire. You have a fire hose here connected to a pumper truck. You have a fire hose here connected to another pumper truck, and the fire is approaching. It will destroy your house and your family in the house. This hose is filled with gasoline. This hose is filled with water. They are clearly marked, and the markings do not betray the contents of the tank and the hose. You have the opportunity to pick up a tank, a hose. One hose was handled by a person of unclean lips. Another person was handled by a person with emails. You don't want to touch either one, and the fire approaches. Or you may not be that person. You say, I'm going to pick up one of those hoses, but I just can't pick that one up. The unclean hands were on the outside. The water is on the inside. Let the water flow. You have a choice. We make these choices small and large every day. This is a big choice. But I present it to you not to tell you anything about the election, but to show to you that you have to analyze things clearly. King College prepares you to think clearly. I deal with students all the time who do not think clearly. If you had a logic map, you could not follow what they say at the beginning to the conclusion where they reside. That's the beauty of King College. You won't appreciate it until you are gone. I didn't even know I was getting it when I was getting it, but I'm thankful to God that I did. As I said at the beginning, this is a special place. It's special because in 1867, when it was founded, it was people taking on a new challenge. The leadership of this school, your president, whom I love, I just met him, I love this man, your board of your trustees and the people who donate, they are doing God's work. 150 years ago, in Eastern Virginia, a school was founded to educate freedmen. It is now known as Hampton University. It was founded by missionaries. They also founded a training school for Native Americans, which operated until 1923. Hampton Institute became Hampton University. It educates people for life. That's their motto. And the motto here at King, if you don't know it now, know it before you graduate. Does anybody, you can answer this, does anybody who's a student know the motto? You can just say yes. Don't have to say it and maybe fail. Just say yes. The silence. I didn't know it either. It's so bad, I had to look it up in preparation for coming. I'm embarrassed by that, but I'm just a normal guy. But that doesn't detract from the importance of it for church and for learning. You see, there is no learning without the church. It is a void and vacant education if you do not understand how education fits into God's plan for mankind. It is because of ignorance that we kill, maim, destroy each other. And we can be educated, but without a knowledge of God, we're just educated vandals. It is our nature. I was chased by God for so long, and I outran him until he spoke to me and said, I will not chase after you always. And I stopped. That allowed me to be a champion for people who were disenfranchised, for people who had been discriminated against. I did it first as a volunteer. It became a job. I did it at the state level. I did it at the national level for 8 years. I was able to even prosecute my former boss's boss, who was my first introduction to sexual harassment in the workplace, because a fellow black female employee complained to me about our mutual boss doing things to her, and our own boss, a black man, was incapable of addressing the issue. Why? Because he thought his job would be on the line, and it may have been. But being young and foolish, I had no such concerns, only 3 children and a wife at home. I raced into the fire, I addressed the issue with him, and I promptly lost my job. But that was in the providence of God. Because in losing that job in Richmond, I was promoted to a job in Northern Virginia, covering 7 states, and able to come back and lead the prosecution against him. And he had a very nice retirement party to which I went. And they said, "You are the last person we would expect to see here." I said, "I know. I am the last person you would see here, because after this, we're turning out the lights." I drove back home to Arlington, which was about an hour-and-a-half drive, and went home. My wife said, "Why were you at work so late?" I said, "I had some things to do." She never knew I had driven from Arlington to Richmond to go to my former boss's boss' retirement party, in which I had a hand, because justice doesn't worry about traveling. There are stories like that in my life, just one after the other. But the hand of God is in all of them, in each and every one. And today, I'm retired, but I am busier now than if I had a job. Why? Because evil never sleeps. I fight for the unborn. The most dangerous place in America today is where? The womb. Helpless. There they are. For fun, for convenience, for "I'm not ready yet," they are slaughtered. I hope that somebody here will carry on when I am gone to work to save those children. Women who undergo abortions are scarred. They are emotionally scarred. We have to think about them as well. They've been fed a lie. People who make money off them feed them lies. They call it women's health. It's everything to do but about health. It's about money. Be not one of those, and be not one of those who sits by idly and watch it. Fight for justice. Fight for Christ. Enjoy the wonderful life of being in the bosom of Jesus Christ, our Savior. It is challenging. It is scary. It is absolutely wonderful. So I say that to you as a way of encouraging you. The king is a new thing. It has always been a new thing. It was new in 1867. It was new in 1967 when I came. It is even new now. It is always new because it is always being renewed by the Spirit of God. I can't say that about every place that has a website that ends in edu. The powers of darkness surround us. I work in places of great darkness. I work in Washington, D.C. I volunteer there now, but I work there. I'm going to close with one very brief story, which many of you will find quite astounding. But it was the nomination of now Associate Justice on the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas, a friend of mine who called me in the middle of the night at about 2 o'clock and said, no, his wife called and said, "You and Kay, come here now." So we got in the car, found somebody to watch our young children, and we went. He was in a fetal position in the bed. He had been nominated by the president, G.H.W. Bush, for a seat on the court. The Anita Hill story had broken. Anita Hill was a woman who accused him of sexual improprieties. He said, "Why are they doing this to me? I didn't do it." And I said to him, "They're doing this to you so that you know that when you sit on that court, and you will sit on that court, you will know that George Bush and the Senate did not put you there, but it was God. You have to go through this, because if you go through this, you will be tested. And until you are tested, you are worthless. You will be of great value to this nation, but undergo this test. Stand firm. As the scriptures say, stand firm." He is on the court. He counts that as a turning point in his life. Not that he got promoted to the highest court in the land, but that he was tested by a test conformed to his needs as a man, that he might stand for justice as long as he is on the court. You will be tested. It is good for you. Pass the test. Trust the Lord in the darkness. Trust Him when your friends abandon you. That's what faith is. And without that faith, we have no culture. We only have anarchy and chaos. Thank you. I will take one question if I may. If you want me to, I'll take one. Only time for one. You have to yell it out if you want me to hear it. Don't be afraid, I won't bite. As they say in the Congress, hearing none, it is done.